The cold winter wind whipped through Blackwater Creek, Wyoming territory, as the auctioneer's gavel came down for the third time. Sold. The silent bride goes to the man in the back. The year was 1879, and mail-order brides were common enough in these parts. But Bethany Kent was different. She hadn't spoken a single word since arriving on yesterday's stagecoach. Preston Slater leaned against the post office wall, watching the scene unfold with narrowed eyes. He hadn't intended to attend the bride auction. Such things turned his stomach, women being sold off like cattle to the highest bidder. But something about the quiet woman with auburn hair and downcast eyes had caught his attention when she'd first stepped off the coach. The winner of the auction, a red-faced rancher named Horace Wilkins, approached Bethany with a triumphant grin. "Well, girl, looks like you're coming home with me." He reached for her arm, but she flinched away, her eyes wide with fear. Preston pushed himself off the wall before he realized what he was doing. "Hold on there, Wilkins." The crowd parted as Preston strode forward. At 6'2", with shoulders broad from years of breaking horses, he cut an imposing figure. "What do you want, Slater?" Wilkins growled. "I paid fair and square." "How much?" Preston asked, reaching for his wallet. $200, the auctioneer called out. Preston pulled out his entire savings, $250, and handed it to the auctioneer. "I'm offering more." Wilkins sputtered in protest, but the auctioneer's eyes lit up at the higher sum. "Sold again, to Preston Slater," the crowd murmured in surprise. Preston Slater, the solitary cowboy who ran a small horse ranch outside of town, buying a bride. It was unheard of. Preston didn't look at the woman as he approached her. Instead, he extended his hand, palm up, waiting. After a moment's hesitation, Bethany placed her trembling hand in his. Without a word, he led her to where his horse, Maverick, was hitched outside the general store. Bethany stood perfectly still as Preston collected her single battered suitcase. The townspeople watched, whispering behind their hands. The silent bride and the stoic cowboy, what an odd pair they made. Preston secured her suitcase to his saddle, then turned to face her. "I'm taking you to my ranch," he said quietly. "You'll be safe there." Bethany's green eyes searched his face, looking for deception or cruelty, but finding none. She nodded once. With gentle hands, Preston lifted her onto Maverick's back. He swung up behind her, one arm around her waist to steady her as they rode out of town. The warmth of his chest against her back was the first comfort Bethany had felt in months. The 10-mile ride to Preston's ranch passed in silence. Bethany noticed how the cowboy didn't press her to speak, didn't ask questions or make demands. He simply held her securely as they traversed the rugged Wyoming landscape. The ranch came into view as they crested a hill, a modest cabin with a large barn and corral where several horses grazed. Smoke curled from the chimney, promising warmth against the approaching evening chill. "It's not much," Preston said as they rode into the yard, "but it's peaceful here." He helped her down from the horse with careful hands, then grabbed her suitcase. "Come on inside, you must be hungry." The cabin was simple but tidy, one main room with a kitchen area, a table with 2 chairs, and a small sitting area with a stone fireplace. A curtain partially concealed a bed in one corner, and a ladder led to what appeared to be a loft. "You can have the bed," Preston said, setting her suitcase down. "I'll sleep in the loft." Bethany's eyes widened in surprise. She looked at him questioningly. "I didn't buy you to be my wife, Miss Kent," Preston explained, reading her expression. "I bought you to free you. You're welcome to stay here as long as you need, but I won't be expecting anything from you." Relief washed over Bethany's face, and to Preston's surprise, tears filled her eyes. She reached for his hand and squeezed it in gratitude. "Can you write?" Preston asked gently. Bethany nodded. He retrieved a small slate and chalk from a shelf. "If you need to tell me something, you can use this." Bethany took the slate and quickly wrote, "Thank you." Preston nodded. "Hungry," she wrote. "Very. Then let's eat." Over the next few days, they fell into an easy routine. Preston would rise before dawn to tend to his horses. He bred and trained them for ranchers and the cavalry, while Bethany took over the cooking and household chores, despite Preston's insistence that she didn't need to earn her keep. They communicated through her slate, brief exchanges that grew longer as Bethany became more comfortable. Preston learned that she was 22, from Boston, and had come west as a mail-order bride because she had no family left after her parents died of influenza. What Preston didn't ask and what Bethany didn't volunteer was why she didn't speak. He figured she'd tell him when she was ready, if ever. A week after her arrival, Preston found Bethany in the corral, cautiously approaching his gentlest mare, a dappled gray named Willow. He leaned against the fence, watching as the horse nickered softly, and Bethany reached out a hesitant hand to stroke her nose. "She likes you," Preston called. Bethany turned, a smile lighting her face. It was the first real smile he'd seen from her, and it transformed her features from merely pretty to breathtaking. "Would you like to learn to ride her?" Preston asked. Bethany nodded eagerly, and for the next hour Preston taught her the basics of horsemanship. She was a quick learner, and by the end of the lesson she was trotting Willow around the corral with confidence. When they finished, Bethany wrote on her slate, "This is the happiest I've felt in a long time." Preston felt something warm unfurl in his chest. "Good," he said simply. That night, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Bethany wrote, "Why did you really buy me at that auction?" Preston stared into the flames, considering his answer. "I've seen what happens to women who get sold to men like Wilkins," he finally said. "I couldn't let that happen to you." Bethany studied him for a long moment, then wrote, "You're a good man, Preston Slater." He shook his head. "I'm just trying to do right." As winter deepened, the days grew shorter and the nights colder. Preston and Bethany settled into a comfortable companionship. He taught her to ride and to care for the horses, and she turned his Spartan cabin into a home, adding small touches that made the place warmer and more inviting. Preston found himself looking forward to returning to the cabin each evening, to the light in the windows and the smell of cooking. He enjoyed their silent conversations by the fire, the way Bethany's expressive face and quick writing conveyed so much without words. He tried not to think about how his heart quickened when she smiled at him, or how his skin tingled when their hands accidentally brushed. He'd promised her safety, not complications. In early December, a blizzard hit the ranch. Preston had been in town picking up supplies when the storm rolled in. He barely made it back, the wind howling around him and snow reducing visibility to mere feet. He stumbled into the cabin, half frozen, to find Bethany pacing worriedly. When she saw him, relief flooded her face, and without thinking, she threw her arms around him. Preston stood stunned for a moment before his arms went around her, holding her close. She was warm and soft against him, and something inside him that had been cold for years began to thaw. Bethany pulled back, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. She grabbed her slate. "I was worried. The storm came so suddenly." "I'm all right," Preston assured her, removing his snow-covered coat. Though it was a close call. The blizzard raged for 3 days, keeping them confined to the cabin. They passed the time playing cards, reading from Preston's small collection of books, and talking, Preston speaking aloud and Bethany writing on her increasingly crowded slate. On the third night, as they sat close together by the fire, Preston found himself telling Bethany things he'd never told anyone about growing up on his father's failing ranch, about fighting in the closing years of the Civil War as a teenager, about drifting through the West before settling in Wyoming 5 years ago. "I never planned to stay in one place," he admitted, "but these mountains got under my skin." Bethany wrote, "I understand. I feel at peace here too." Their eyes met over the slate, and Preston felt a charge in the air between them. Bethany's lips parted slightly, and for a wild moment he thought about kissing her. Instead, he stood abruptly. "It's getting late," he said. "We should turn in." The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving a pristine white landscape and a crystalline blue sky. Preston went out early to check on the horses and clear paths through the snow. When he returned to the cabin for lunch, he found Bethany looking troubled. "What's wrong?" he asked. She hesitated, then wrote, "When the winter ends, what happens to me? The question caught Preston off guard. He hadn't thought beyond getting through the winter. "What do you want to happen?" She stared at the slate for a long time before writing. "I don't know." Preston felt a knot form in his stomach. Of course she wouldn't want to stay forever in this isolated cabin with a man she barely knew. Come spring, she'd probably want to move on, find a proper town where she could build a life. "You're welcome to stay as long as you want," he said carefully. "But if you decide to leave, I'll help you get wherever you want to go." Bethany nodded, but the troubled look remained in her eyes. The week before Christmas, Preston rode into town for supplies and to pick up a package he'd ordered special. The streets of Blackwater Creek were decorated with evergreen boughs and red ribbons, and the saloon was doing a brisk business as cowboys and miners celebrated the holiday season. As Preston tied up his horse outside the general store, he heard a familiar voice call his name. He turned to see Sheriff Tom Bailey approaching. "Slater, good to see you. How's that silent bride of yours working out?" Preston bristled at the phrasing. "Miss Kent is doing well, thank you." The sheriff raised an eyebrow. "Still not talking, eh? Town's been buzzing with theories about that. Most popular one is that she's running from the law." "She's not a criminal," Preston said flatly. "Never said she was," Bailey replied. "Just passing along the gossip." Though there was a telegram came through for her last week. From Boston, Preston frowned. "A telegram for Bethany?" "That's right. Nothing urgent, according to the operator. Said he'd hold it until someone from your place came to town." Preston collected the telegram along with his supplies and the special package. All the way home, he wondered about the message. Who in Boston would be contacting Bethany? She'd said she had no family left. When he arrived at the ranch, Bethany was in the corral with Willow, brushing the mare's coat. She waved when she saw him, her face lighting up in a way that made Preston's heart skip. He handed her the telegram without comment. Bethany's hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Preston watched her face as she read first surprise, then what looked like relief. "She went to get her slate. It's from my former employer, Mrs. Abernathy. She wants me to know the charges were dropped. I am no longer accused of theft." Preston's eyebrows shot up. "You were accused of theft." Bethany's writing became hurried. "I was a lady's companion to Mrs. Abernathy. Her son planted a necklace in my room and accused me of stealing it. I had to flee. It's why I came west." "And why you don't speak?" Preston guessed. She nodded, writing, "The shock of being accused of losing everything. Something broke inside me. The words won't come out anymore." Preston felt a surge of anger at the man who had done this to her, followed by profound sadness for what Bethany had endured. "I'm sorry that happened to you," he said quietly. Bethany erased her slate and wrote new words. "Now that my name is cleared, I could go back." The words hit Preston like a physical blow. He hadn't realized until that moment how much he'd come to depend on Bethany's presence, how much he'd come to care for her. "Is that what you want?" he asked, his voice rough. "To go back to Boston." Bethany studied his face for a long moment before writing, "No. There's nothing for me there anymore." Relief washed through Preston. "Good," he said simply. Then, feeling awkward, he added, "I mean, it's good you know what you want." That evening, after dinner, Preston brought out the special package he'd picked up in town. "I got something for you," he said, handing the wrapped parcel to Bethany. "For Christmas." Bethany looked surprised as she unwrapped the gift, a beautifully bound journal and a fine fountain pen. "I thought you might like something better than the slate," Preston explained. "Something that lets you say more." Bethany opened the journal to the first blank page and wrote in her elegant hand, "This is the most thoughtful gift I've ever received." "Thank you, Preston." She looked up at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears, and Preston felt something inside him shift. He realized with sudden clarity that he was falling in love with Bethany Kent. The thought terrified him. Christmas Day dawned clear and cold. Preston rose early as usual, but when he came downstairs from the loft, he found Bethany already up, a small package waiting on the table. "What's this?" he asked. Bethany gestured for him to open it. Inside, he found a handmade leather sheath for his hunting knife. intricately tooled with a design of horses running. "Did you make this?" Preston asked, running his fingers over the careful work. Bethany nodded, opening her new journal to write. "I've been working on it at night. I used to help my father in his leather shop." "It's beautiful," Preston said. "Thank you." They spent the day together, enjoying a special Christmas dinner and then sitting by the fire, talking about their childhoods and Christmases past. As the evening wore on, Preston found himself watching Bethany's face in the firelight, memorizing the curve of her cheek, the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled. When it was time to turn in, Bethany hesitated by her bed, then wrote in her journal, "Thank you for making this the best Christmas I can remember." Preston nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He climbed the ladder to his loft, lying awake long into the night, wondering what the future might hold. January brought bitter cold and more snow. Preston worked shorter days with the horses, spending more time in the warm cabin with Bethany. They read together, played cards, and talked endlessly through her journal. Sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence, Bethany sewing or knitting, Preston carving wood or repairing tack. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Preston found himself telling Bethany about his parents' marriage, how they'd loved each other deeply, how his father had never been the same after his mother died. "That's what I always wanted," he admitted. "What they had. A partnership where both people are stronger together than apart." Bethany wrote, "That's beautiful. I hope you find it someday." Preston looked at her, the firelight casting a golden glow on her face. "I think I might have," he said softly. Bethany's eyes widened and a blush spread across her cheeks. She looked down at her journal, then back up at him, a question in her eyes. Preston took a deep breath. "Bethany, I know this might seem sudden, but it's not to me. These past months with you. I've never felt this way about anyone before. I care for you deeply." Bethany's hands trembled as she wrote, "I care for you too, more than I can say even if I could speak." Preston moved to sit beside her on the small sofa. "I don't need to hear your voice to know your heart," he said. "I see it in everything you do." Slowly, giving her time to pull away, Preston leaned in and kissed her. Bethany's lips were soft against his, tentative at first, then responding with a warmth that made his heart race. When they finally broke apart, her eyes were shining. She wrote quickly, "I never thought I would find you." "Neither did I," Preston admitted, "but now that I have, I don't want to let go." February brought Valentine's Day, which Preston had never celebrated before. But this year, he rode into town and returned with a small box of chocolates and a silver hair comb for Bethany. Her gift to him was even more precious, a smile and a kiss that left him breathless, followed by words in her journal that made his heart soar. "I think I'm falling in love with you." "I know I'm in love with you," Preston replied, pulling her close. "Have been for months now." As winter began to loosen its grip on the land, Preston and Bethany spent more time outdoors. They rode together across his property, Bethany growing more confident on horseback every day. Preston showed her his favorite places, a hidden valley filled with wildflowers that would bloom in spring, a high ridge with views clear to the distant mountains, a quiet pond where deer came to drink at dusk. "I've never shown anyone these places before," he told her as they sat by the pond one mild afternoon. "They've always been just mine." Bethany wrote, "And now they're ours," Preston said. "If you want them to be." Bethany looked at him questioningly. Preston took her hands in his. "Bethany Kent, I know we haven't known each other long, but I can't imagine my life without you in it. Will you stay? Not as my guest, but as my wife." Bethany's eyes filled with tears. She nodded emphatically, then threw her arms around his neck, nearly knocking him backwards. Preston laughed, holding her tight, his heart fuller than he'd ever thought possible. That night, as they sat together planning their future, Bethany wrote something that gave Preston pause. "What if I never speak again? Would you mind having a silent wife?" Preston considered the question carefully. "Your silence doesn't define you, Bethany. It's just one part of who you are. I love all of you, your kindness, your strength, your resilience. Whether you speak aloud or through writing doesn't change that." Tears spilled down Bethany's cheeks as she wrote, "You're the first person who's truly seen me since I lost my voice." "And I always will," Preston promised. They were married in April when the prairie was coming alive with early wildflowers. The ceremony was small, just Preston, Bethany, the preacher, and a few friends from town who had come to accept the silent bride and her devoted cowboy. Bethany wore a simple white dress with Preston's silver comb in her hair. She carried a bouquet of wildflowers that Preston had picked that morning. When it came time for her vows, she handed the preacher a folded paper on which she'd written her promises. As the preacher read her words aloud, pledging her love, her faith, her life to Preston, tears streamed down her face. Preston squeezed her hands, his own eyes damp. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the preacher declared. "You may kiss your bride." Preston pulled Bethany into his arms, kissing her with all the love in his heart. The small gathering applauded, and for the first time in a long time, Preston felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. Life as a married couple came naturally to them. They had already established routines and ways of communicating that worked. Preston's horse business thrived, and Bethany started a small garden beside the cabin, growing vegetables and herbs. In July, Bethany wrote something in her journal that changed everything. "I think I might be expecting a baby." Preston's shock quickly gave way to joy. He swept Bethany into his arms, spinning her around the cabin. "A baby," he kept saying. "We're going to have a baby." The town doctor confirmed it a week later. Bethany was indeed pregnant, due sometime in early spring. As summer turned to fall, Bethany's body changed, growing round with their child. Preston found her more beautiful than ever. He built a cradle from pine wood, carving horses along the sides, while Bethany sewed tiny clothes and blankets. They talked often about names, about how they would raise their child, about the future they were building together. Preston expanded the cabin, adding a proper bedroom and a small nursery. He hired men from town to help with the work, wanting everything to be perfect before winter set in. One night in late October, as they lay in bed together, Preston's hand resting on Bethany's growing belly, he felt a flutter beneath his palm. "Was that?" he asked, eyes wide. Bethany nodded, smiling. She placed her hand over his, and they lay together, feeling their baby move. "I love you both so much," Preston whispered. Bethany reached for the journal she now kept by the bed. She wrote, "We love you too, more than words could ever say." She paused, then added, "But I want to try." Preston looked at her questioningly. Bethany took a deep breath, her face a mixture of determination and fear. She opened her mouth, and at first no sound came out. Then, barely audible, "P. Preston." His name, spoken aloud for the first time in her voice, was the most beautiful sound Preston had ever heard. Tears filled his eyes as Bethany continued, each word a struggle but a triumph. "I love you." Preston gathered her in his arms, his tears falling into her hair. "You did it," he whispered. "You spoke." Bethany nodded against his chest. "For you," she managed, "for our family." That night marked a turning point. Bethany's speech didn't return all at once. It came in fits and starts, sometimes flowing more easily, sometimes deserting her completely. But she kept trying, working with Preston every day. By Christmas, she could speak in short sentences without her journal, though she still carried it everywhere. The sound of her voice, soft and melodious, was Preston's favorite gift that year. Their daughter, Emma Rose Slater, was born on a bright March morning in 1881. She had her mother's green eyes and her father's determined chin. When the doctor placed her in Bethany's arms, Bethany looked up at Preston with wonder. "She's perfect," Bethany said clearly, her voice stronger than it had ever been. Preston kissed his wife's forehead, then his daughter's. "Just like her mother." As spring bloomed across the Wyoming prairie, Preston often found himself pausing in his work to watch Bethany and Emma in the garden, or sitting in the rocking chair on the porch. He would think back to that cold day in Blackwater Creek, when he'd placed a silent bride on his horse and taken her home. He couldn't have known then what that impulsive act would lead to: a love deeper than he'd ever imagined, a family of his own, a home filled with warmth and joy. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Emma asleep in Bethany's arms, Preston asked the question that had been on his mind for months. "Do you ever regret it? Coming here with me that day?" Bethany looked at him, her eyes clear and bright. "Never," she said, her voice steady and sure. "You saved me, Preston, not just from Wilkins or from being alone, but from the silence that was consuming me." "You saved me too," Preston admitted. "I was so alone before you. I didn't even realize how much until you showed me what it means to truly share a life with someone." Bethany leaned her head against his shoulder, their daughter sleeping peacefully between them. "Who would have thought," she murmured, "that a silent bride and a solitary cowboy would find such happiness together?" Preston smiled, watching as the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in shades of gold and rose. "I think we were meant to find each other," he said softly. "Two broken pieces that fit perfectly together." As twilight deepened into night, they sat together in contentment, the small family that had been forged from an act of kindness on a winter day. Around them, the Wyoming wilderness stretched vast and beautiful, but Preston Slater no longer felt alone in it. He had found his home in Bethany's arms, in Emma's smile, in the life they were building together, a life that had begun when he placed a silent bride on his horse and took her home.